You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Welcome, fellow patriots. Get ready for an hour of unabashedly pro-American, pro-conservative, and pro-biblical principles. This is the Blake Johnson Program.
Hello, America. Welcome to the Blake Johnson Program and to the Lanterns Radio Network, where we're here to fix the machine. Hope you had a great weekend. Oh my gosh, and what a machine we have to fix, don't we? Past week, 2 weeks have been brutal, especially if you are a conservative, if you are someone who loves this country. Just in general, even not even just conservative. It's been a brutal couple of weeks. Not been a great start to 2018. And, I have said from the beginning that I do not want this show to be simply a reactionary show like all the other programs. It just, goes on about what everyone else is talking about. I want to approach things from a different perspective. Not just so I can say, hey, look at me, but because I think so many people are getting so many things wrong in regards to politics, in regards to the culture, just in regards to how they react in general to what happens in our nation. And I've been frustrated, I've been angry, I've been upset, sad, just not in a great mood when it comes to the future of America. And I don't even know where to begin, honestly. There's so many things to address, so many things, and I had to eventually come to a point where I'm like, stop with obsessing over every single thing that's going on, because it seems like whether it be the media, whether it be people on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, your friends, whoever it is, or the president in this case, they want the story to be about whatever it is they want it to be about. And we've got to refocus our priorities. We've got to refocus our principles. So what am I getting at? Well, unfortunately, and I hate doing this, I hate it so much, but I can't ignore it. I just can't ignore it. The comments made by President Trump a few days ago in regards to these crap hole countries, and I'm sure you know by now what he actually said. Especially if you're watching CNN, which could just not take a break from using profanity all day long, talking about that. They didn't care. They didn't care that kids could possibly be watching, I don't know why, but possibly stumble across their network accidentally and hear profanity on the air from people who are supposed to be professionals, who are supposed to care about integrity. Clearly they don't. But they were obsessing over these comments. But on the one hand, I can understand being concerned about it, but I just don't trust. I don't trust CNN. I don't trust the left. I don't trust the progressives on either side. But so many people are wrong about this story. So many have this wrong. So many. And it's frustrating for me, especially friends of mine who I really respect, friends in this business who I really respect, are so dead wrong on this. They're missing some key points. But first, let's just get the obvious out of the way. what the president said was wrong. It was stupid to say what he said, but not necessarily for the reasons that people are saying. So he goes, I guess there's some sort of private meeting in which he was talking about DACA, and he was talking about immigration reform, yada, yada, yada. And at one point he said, why are we bringing all these people in from these crap hole countries? Referring to countries like Haiti and places in Africa that, newsflash, are hellholes. But the reason that upset me was not because he referred to those countries as hellholes, because they are hellholes. They are. And I'm sorry, you can be as upset as you want with me about saying that, but it's true. Show me how it's not true. Show me. I don't need to see pictures of a beautiful landscape. I'm like, oh, well, it's obviously the greatest place on earth. You know, pictures can lie. There are really crappy places in Haiti, in Africa. The government is what screws these countries over. Not necessarily the people, but the governments do. But he was wrong to say it because he was referring to why do we allow these people to come in from those countries. He wasn't saying the people are detestable. He was saying the countries were, and I think that's a fair argument to make. But at the same time, people will be quick to point out, well, look at the past comments that he's made about, Mexican judges and, people of different races and the demeaning things he's said about that. Yeah, he has said those things, and I'm not excusing that whatsoever. But I think in this particular case, he wasn't referring to race. There's no racist comment there. And the media obsess over, look, he's a racist. How was that a racist comment? That wasn't a racist comment at all. Just purely in that context. Nothing racist about it. But doesn't matter with the left. Doesn't matter with the media. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter with many on the right. However, it just goes to show that the President of the United States could learn a very valuable lesson that I've had to learn. Shut up. Shut up. I want to like Donald Trump, and I have praised him multiple times on this program. Don't believe me? Go back and listen to the archives, and you'll see for yourself. But I've praised him multiple times, even though I didn't support him during the election, even though I didn't vote for him. I still support many of the policies that his administration has done. So I want to cheer for him. But when he says things like that, and not just that, I mean, again, the past couple of weeks have been a travesty. Look at me, I am such a genius, I'm so smart, I am so stable. Yeah, clearly not. Or, hey, I'm against DUC, I'm against all these things. And then, hey, I trust all these liberals and progressives here in the room with me to come up with a plan, and that's going to be my position on the issue. Just complete backtracking, complete betrayal, or near total betrayal of his promises if he goes through with this. But whenever he's just trying to get something passed, get something done, he does a great job. But when he gets on Twitter, it makes me feel like I can't support him. How can you support this? And, I get tired of people saying, well, he's just unconventional. That doesn't make him right. I don't care if he's unconventional. I don't want him to merely be different. I want him to be a person of principle. I want him to be the president. I want him to be an adult. At the very least, be an adult. Now, people on the left, people on the right, they are not going to enjoy what I'm about to say. But let me start with the right. You need to stop excusing every single thing that this man says or does that is clearly inexcusable. Just stop doing it. You complained about many of these things when Obama and the left did it. But now You don't care. Now, well, it's just, I'm just fed up. It's time to, give them a taste of their own medicine. Find that passage in Scripture where it says, thou shalt give them a taste of their own medicine. You will not find it. In fact, it says, it talks about this whole an eye for an eye thing. Yeah, that's not cool. I don't believe that. That goes against Jesus and his message. So stop doing that. Just you can be a supporter without being a blind supporter, without being just crazy and just raving mad. At the same time, there are those on the right who are just going nuts over this comment, as much as the left is. I say to you, stop talking. Stop overreacting. I don't believe the President of the United States meant anything racist by it. In fact, he has said very kind things about the people of Haiti before. But the media don't want that to go out there for you. They don't want you to know that. They only focus on the negative, never the positive. At least as far as the left-wing media is concerned. I heard people say things like, how dare you say these countries are hellholes, because this country has done some pretty terrible things too. Are you kidding me? You claim to be a conservative? You know better than that. You know better than that. Just because this country has done some pretty terrible things doesn't mean that we are the worst of all time, that we are irredeemable, that we haven't done anything that's pretty good, that we still aren't the greatest country on the face of the earth, because we are, because of the opportunities that we give to people in those hellhole countries who should be allowed to come here, which again is why I criticize the president, because he's making it out to be that we shouldn't bring those people in. Because he talks about, Norway and, and Sweden and Denmark and places like that. That does not help at all. It doesn't help. So many on the right need to calm down as well as those who are excusing everything he says and does. Now to the left. Stop with the fake news and the fake outrage. It is infuriating that all of a sudden you claim to care about demeanor. You claim to care about integrity. You claim to care about showing love and respect and consideration towards others. Where were you during the Obama administration? Where were you when pastors, when conservatives, when Christians were being called racist, homophobic, backward-thinking rednecks? Where were you when many on your side were comparing Bush to Hitler, and are comparing Trump to Hitler, by the way, and compare anyone on the right who claims to believe in God, who claims to believe in marriage between a man and a woman as homophobic, or who claim to believe in the protection of human life, born and unborn, as being anti-woman? Where were you when those comments were being made by those who just want people to live? People who just have a different opinion. And I hear this, unfortunately, fairly regularly, and sometimes even on the right. How quick we are to forget the hatred and the vitriol coming from Barack Obama, coming from Michelle Obama, coming from those in the administration. Oh, they were very good at covering it up as, as being congenial, as being kind, as being respectful. But if you look at the past, the things that Obama has said on tape, one could suggest that maybe Obama has a deep-seated hatred or deep-seated animosity towards those of a different race or those of a different background. In fact, he even said, he called his grandmother, I believe it was, the typical white person who, when they see someone that is different from them, they have this deep-seated animosity that is bred into them. How is that not controversial? But oh no, you wouldn't hear that from CNN or MSNBC or NBC or any of those outlets, ever. Because you can't criticize this man, otherwise you're a racist. Well, now, reporters like Jim Acosta, who makes it, I guess, his ritual to shout at Press Secretary Sanders every single meeting period, says the very same thing about Donald Trump. Well, he must have a deep-seated animosity. He must be a racist. And the media is silent. Well, he's right. This is madness. Pure madness. And I hate talking about it. But at the same time, it's important because this goes to who we are as a people. All sides are getting this wrong. All sides are missing the point. The point is, we should be people who care about other people, even if they don't agree with us, especially if they don't agree with us. We shouldn't be demeaning them. We shouldn't be saying that they're racist, that they're homophobic. We shouldn't be, trying to shout them down and make them feel as small as we can possibly make them feel, just because they disagree. But that's what we're doing. We have hardened our hearts to the truth. And it's made me ask this question to myself. How do we survive? How do we, as a country, as a society, survive? We are not the America that we used to be. We are the United States of America in name only. We haven't been that country in a long time. United? When's the last time we were united in something good and something positive? Now it's unity and hatred, which isn't anything to be excited about at all. A house divided against itself cannot stand. It's not just from Abraham Lincoln. That's in Scripture, guys. This is an age-old truth. We are divided amongst ourselves, and we can't seem to find our way back to each other. Look, I have friends who I completely disagree with, who don't believe in God, aren't sure if they believe in God, or claim to believe in God and believe in all this other crap that is clearly not biblical. People of all different backgrounds. But even still, I try to show love. I try to find some way to find common ground. We've got to return to that. And we've got to start expecting more from our leaders. Because, got news for you, gang, our leaders represent us. And we can't just simply put this genie back in the bottle. Electing someone like Donald Trump, who's very vitriolic and very childish and arrogant and narcissistic sometimes. And then all of a sudden, later on, we just elect some really moral leader, a George Washington-esque kind of person. No, we have to change ourselves before we can change everything else around us. We'll get into more of that later on in the program and spend some time talking about things that really matter and things that we should know more about that can hopefully perhaps get us on the path to restoring our republic. We'll do that after this break on the Blake Johnson program. Stay tuned.
Listening to the Blake Johnson program on the Lanterns Radio Network.
Alright, welcome back to the program. I hope I made some sense in the last segment, in my opening monologue. I know I can go a long time. There's so much on my mind, and it can be really hard to condense it, because if you just look at the news, it is non-stop. We're like just over 2 weeks into this new year, and we've had so much happen in the past 2 weeks that would normally take place throughout the year. And I don't even know how to respond to these things anymore as a broadcaster. That's why I am trying so hard to change the course of this program, to be a beacon of light, to be a beacon of hope. Because we really need more of that. I need more of that. I don't want to be someone who is so depressed and stressed out every day. We've got to find things that we can find hope in. That doesn't mean we, just turn a blind eye to what's going on. But in the midst of the darkness, there is light. We have to find that light and be that light. And, I was thinking, this is just how I am. I'm a big nerd and proud nerd. You obviously know I love Star Wars, and just this quote from the original Star Wars movie popped in my head, and I know it wasn't necessarily meant in this context. Maybe there was part of it that could be taken that way, but this is just how it means to me, especially in today's world. But there's a scene in the New Hope on the Millennium Falcon, and they had just escaped the Empire on the desert planet of Tatooine, and they're on their way to Alderaan to deliver this message to the princess and her father to, destroy the Death Star and, defeat the Empire. So they're on their way, and while they're waiting, Luke is training. He's doing this very basic training that is common for all Jedi, all aspiring Jedi, all young Padawans. And he has his father's lightsaber out, and he's practicing with this remote droid that shoots, shoots blaster bolts at him. But he obviously he's only just started training, so he doesn't really know what he's doing. And he keeps getting hit, over and over again. And he's trying to use his human eyes, his flesh, to see where the robot's going to shoot him so he can block it with a lightsaber. And at one point, he gets frustrated, and Obi-Wan walks up to him and says, you need to let go of your conscious self and act on instinct. And he puts a helmet over Luke's head, but it has a blast shield over it, so he can't see anything. And Luke complains, like, oh, I can't see through this. How am I supposed to fight? And this is the quote I want to focus on. Obi-Wan says, "Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them." How true is that in today's world? I just thought, I was like, oh my gosh, that is such a valid line in today's world. How many times do we see things in, whether it be the news or social media, we don't even know what to believe anymore. Just because we see something doesn't necessarily make it true. And I'm not talking about, the government's in. I'm not an Alex Jones, InfoWars, conspiracy theorist kind of guy. That's not what I mean. I just mean there are things that we want to see. We want to see things in a certain lens, whether it be on the left. The left wants to see Donald Trump as a racist. They want to see him as a monster, as a dictator, as an evil person. And, you see things like that on the right as well. There's some on the right that refuse to talk about the bad things that America has done, that refuse to talk about our past, that refuse to hold people accountable when they are wrong today. They see what they want to say. I'm guilty of it. I do it. So I get it. It's really easy. And, I don't want to see things I don't want to see these days as dark days. I don't want to see the hate as I want it to be a bad dream, and you wake up and all of a sudden things are not as they seem. But unfortunately, we have to see things for the way they truly are, not for the way we want them to be. And sometimes, in order to do that, we have to, as Yoda would say, unlearn what we have learned, what we have been taught to believe. You know, you look at I talk about this all the time, look at the education system. Look at what you're being taught in the university system, in the public education system. And there's so much revisionist history. There's so much, look at Common Core. It's madness. So many times we are told to believe things that really are either exaggerated or just flat out false. And, you watch CNN, you watch MSNBC, and if you watch them long enough, you begin to believe everything they say, even though it's not the whole story. And the same goes with watching networks like Fox News. The point I'm trying to make here is your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them. In other words, don't simply believe things on the surface. There's usually more going on there than meets the eye. You've heard it said, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, that's not just true with people who are different than you, although that is very important and very true. It's important in everyday life. Just because things look a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that's what they are. And that's what scares me about the future of this country, and why I wonder if we'll survive this. And I'll talk about this in the weeks and months ahead. But one of the bedrock principles, we talked about federalism last week. One of the bedrock principles of this country is the civil society. Well, what is that? What is the civil society? A society that believes in integrity and truth and, helping the helpless and feeding the homeless and all these things that were talked about in Scripture that can also relate to everyday life. Well, that's what Scripture is. It's meant to influence your everyday life. And we'll get into more detail about that, pretty soon. But do we even have a civil society anymore? Do we even care to have that? Or are we just in it for ourselves? Are we just so focused on being independent that we lose the focus on where our dependence should be on? And, that's a whole nother discussion. I don't want to get too far deep into that, but it merits the question, do we survive? And if we do, how? Well, it has to start at home, for one thing. You have to educate yourself and not depend on someone else to educate you. Don't take what somebody else says as gospel, because it's not gospel. Whether it be a professor or a pastor, unfortunately, that can be true today. What a pastor says, what I say, what anyone that you like to listen to says, do your own homework. Find out the truth. Always honest questioning over blindfolded fear. It's what Thomas Jefferson said, and it's absolutely true. So, alright, I'm going to take a break from all of that and come back and talk about the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and why I believe it is an absolute abomination to everything that our founders stood for. Talk about that and so much more after this break.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Thanks for staying with us on the Blake Johnson program on the Lanterns Radio Network. Great to have you here with us this hour. And this segment, I want to spend some time focusing on history and how that relates to today. If you were listening to the program last week, talked about federalism and the importance of federalism, the importance of, giving the people and the states as much of a voice as possible and not consolidating power solely to a centralized governmental system that, drifted away from the concerns of the people and instead put up their own interests ahead of, those of the people, which that's basically what we see today in many aspects. But I want to spend some time focusing on different really important pieces of our government and the way it was set up by the founders and the way things used to be. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but it doesn't necessarily seem like the United States of America is quite like the country it was when the founders set it up. Maybe it's just me, but that's what I've noticed. And it's important to ask the question, why? Why are things the way they are now? What has led us to this point? Well, another piece of this has to deal with something that you may or may not have heard much about or been taught that it's necessarily a bad thing. In fact, many professors on college campuses and so on and so forth, especially ones that lean more towards the progressive side of history, will praise this amendment to the U.S. Constitution as being for the people. But when you really get into the weeds of what this amendment, the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution, was all about, you'll understand this is a detestable amendment, and it goes against the very fabric of our country. And, in fact, many of the founders warned about what would happen if an amendment like this was put in place. And, in fact, there was an effort to put an amendment like this in place when they were talking about putting forth the Constitution. So what is the 17th Amendment? Well, first of all, it was ratified in 1913, April 8th, 1913, so just over a century ago. Interestingly enough, during the Woodrow Wilson administration, and perhaps in the weeks and months ahead, I will do some history into Woodrow Wilson, one, if not the worst president in American history, at least as far as I'm concerned. But this took place during his term. And here's what it reads. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. The electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. When vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies, provided that the legislature of any state shall empower the executive thereof to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancies by election as the legislature may direct. This amendment shall not be construed as to affect the election or term of any senator chosen before it becomes valid as part of the Constitution. So, essentially, this is what gave us direct election of the senators today. Because the way it used to be, back over a century ago, senators were chosen by the state legislatures, and the people directly elected congressmen and congresswomen to the House of Representatives. But in 1913, that all changed. Now, direct election was not just for the House of Representatives, but it was also for the Senate. Now, you may have been taught in college that this was a great turning point for America. This was the federal government giving more of a voice to the people of this country. Well, they are wrong. That is not what this was about. I was doing some more research on this, and it's quite interesting when you see how the deception that was used by the progressives, those who had another vision for America other than one of small government, one of liberty, one of personal responsibility. But they were they did a very, very good job of deceiving the American people into thinking that this amendment would in fact give them more of a voice and further protect their liberties, when in fact it really doesn't. And I'll go more into detail of specifically why it doesn't and how it's affected our politics today. Let me read to you some of this from the Liberty Amendments by Mark Levin, who is a constitutional scholar, served 8 years in the Reagan administration, wasn't he like a chief advisor, I believe, to he was a top advisor to several members of the cabinet. So he's a very well-read, well-learned individual. And here's what he wrote about the 17th Amendment. Of course, like I said, it altered fundamentally the way most senators had been chosen for 124 years. They served for 6 years, with a third of the Senate up for state legislature re-election every 2 years. If vacancies in Senate seats arose between elections, the state legislatures typically chose a replacement to serve the remainder of the unexpired term. Now, considered by itself, the 17th Amendment seemed reasonable enough, which is why it was ratified in near record time. If democracy in limited doses is good, so went the progressive cant at the time, then, by all means, more democracy could only be proportionally better, right? If choosing congressmen and congresswomen in the House of Representatives by popular vote works so well, then why not choose senators by direct popular elections? The fact that the framers established a different method for choosing senators and considered that method critical to the proper functioning of the federal government was of no consequence. However, the framers did, in fact, value democratic expression. For most of them, popular democracy was a vital aspect of consensual government. But they also understood that along with its benefits, there were shortcomings, and the will of the people, subject to majoritarian and factional swings and lurches, should be balanced with dispassionate, considered judgment through a stable and diffused governing construct. So what's he saying here? He's saying that, yes, while the framers, the founding fathers, strongly believed in giving we the people a voice, and a strong voice at that, they also understood that government is a necessary evil. And they also understood that the heart of man is inherently bad. It's not inherently good. So, while man can make good decisions when, properly constrained, whether it be by themselves or, in that case, by the Senate, most of the time, men and women tended to, go with whatever the popular opinion was at the time. And we see that today with things like gay marriage and abortion and, I guess, transgenderism, which is on the rise. And, just things like that used to be taboo are now considered normal and acceptable. Well, the founders understood that people tend to drift away from that which is moral, that which is sound principle. So that's why they believed that having a Senate, which was, chosen by the state legislatures, would be a good balance to that. At the same time, they also understood that you couldn't, at the same time, make that body too big. The Senate couldn't be comprised of hundreds and hundreds of members, because otherwise that just tips the balance in favor of the government over the people. Again, it goes back to checks and balances. So continuing on, the simple, logical elegance of the organization of the Senate belied the extent and passion of the discussions over its creation, both at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787 and in the state ratification conventions. Like nearly every clause in the Constitution, the framers intended that the nature and operation of the Senate serve several functions simultaneously. Providing the state governments with direct input in the national government was not only an essential check on the new federal government's power, but also a means by which the states could influence congressional lawmaking without stripping the federal government of its enumerated primacy over certain matters of governments. Moreover, the equal representation of the Senate provided the less populated states with a critical limit on the possibility that the more populated states would hold powerful sway over the affairs of the nation. Let me read that again, because this is really important. Moreover, the equal representation in the Senate provided the less populated states with a critical limit on the possibility that the more populated states, say, in this case, California, would hold powerful sway over the affairs of the nation. In addition, the small size and relative stability of the Senate created an institutional means for tempering fleeting majoritarian or factional passions. There was also strong sentiment among the convention delegates that the Senate, by virtue of its limited size and exclusive membership, could serve as a de facto privy council for the president. So let's go over some of this. So when it talks about, this is why, in regards to the House, as you know, how many congressmen and congresswomen from each state in regards to the House depends largely on the population of that state. So California has more representatives in the House than, say, Rhode Island or Missouri or Illinois. I know this sounds really basic knowledge, things like that, but it's important to understand these things because it goes into why the 17th Amendment undid all of, quite frankly, the genius that the founders put in place. And again, it's not like they just sat there and just came up with it and just passed it, quickly. They debated this passionately for years. People from both sides arguing for many different kinds of legislation, many kinds of different amendments. But at the end of the day, they all gathered together and realized that liberty is crucial. After the convention's draft constitution was dispatched to the states for ratification, the character of the Senate was an imperative selling point about the federal nature of the proposed national government. This is one of my favorite parts to this. In Federalist 39 of the Federalist Papers, James Madison went to great pains to delineate the ways in which the Constitution established a federal republican form of government. He says, quote, and before I read this is one of the things that has become my pet peeve. One of my pet peeves, anyway, is how people will say we're a democracy. We are not a democracy. Yes, we do have some elements of democracy in America, but we are by no means not even close to an actual democracy. In fact, we are a constitutional republic. And if you don't believe me, here's one of the founding fathers. He says, James Madison says, quote, "The first question that offers itself is whether the general form and aspect of the government be strictly republican. It is evident that no other form would be reconcilable with the genius of the people of America, with the fundamental principles of the Revolution, or with that honorable determination which animates every votary of freedom to rest all our political experiments on the capacity of mankind for self-government." So yes, we are a republic, or at least we used to be. That is the kind of government that was set up by our founding fathers. Indeed, the state convention process is a response to an oppressive federal government, the potential of which was feared by the framers. However, it will be opposed by the statist, for he may pose as a Democrat, but its democratic and ubiquitous edifice the federal government has become. It is the state legislatures acting together that can buffer the individual from the relentless trespasses of the federal government and restore constitutional republicanism. Rather than spending time conferring with the elected state officials who would have sent them to Washington, D.C., and representing primarily state interests in the Senate, these senators now spend more time with and are more beholden to Washington lobbyists, campaign funders, national political consultants, and national advocacy organizations. In fact, states are often viewed as little more than another constituency, one among hundreds, with interests that may or may not be relevant to or comport with a senator's political and policy ambitions. Furthermore, state sovereignty is not a top priority for most senators because the state legislators hold no sway over them. And why is that? Why don't they? Well, you see, because the way it used to be, yes, senators were elected by the state legislators. However, the state legislators had a much better relationship with the people of each state. So, if a senator at that time voted out of line and voted against the interest of the state, they could be recalled. And they were recalled. They were definitely recalled if they stepped out of line from the interest of the people, from the interest of the Constitution. So it's not like it was just the state was just all by itself and it was a group of elites determining who and who wouldn't serve their needs. No, it wasn't like that at all. But that's not what the progressives will tell you. In fact, that's one of the lies the progressives spread to get the people to support and vote for representatives who championed an amendment like the 17th Amendment, because they were fed lies by the progressives. Consequently, as a result, let's back up here. Therefore, situations arise when senators vote for major federal legislation over the strenuous objections for their own states. For example, more than half of all states, 27 states, joined federal litigation to overturn the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, yet the law was passed in the Senate by a large majority of 60 votes. In Virginia, both Senators Mark Warner and Jim Webb voted for Obamacare, despite strong objection from Virginia state officials. The State General Ken Cuccinelli was among the first to bring a lawsuit. Consequently, as a result of one election in 2008, where the Democratic Party controlled all the elected parts of the federal government for a short 2-year period, there was no counterweight or check on lawmaking, which the Senate, whose members were elected by the state legislators, would have provided. Although in the very next election cycle in 2010, the Republican Party won historic victories at all levels of government, including a huge victory in the House, the Senate and President resisted all efforts to modify or repeal Obamacare. Its implementation proceeded at a feverish, albeit chaotic pace, as it does today. Meanwhile, the people continued to oppose Obamacare, as they have from the outset. Now, let's go over some more details over this. How were the progressives able to spin this towards the people? How were they able to make up information to deceive the populace? Well, you see, in the late 1800s, this is from the Federalists, the progressive movement turned its ire on this constitutional provision. With their unshakable belief in the moral rightness of democracy, progressives argued that legislative election of senators led inevitably to state-level political corruption, like I said earlier. Their revisionist historians painted a picture of a vast political conspiracy in which state elections were regularly bought and sold by local party machines to elect senators who would serve the interests of the elites over those of the people. These are some of the lies that they spread to the people. But as many historians have recognized, the data simply wasn't on the progressive side. Think of this. Only three senatorial elections were investigated for corruption between the years 1857 and 1900. In over more than a century of legislative election of senators, only 10 total elections were contested for impropriety of any sort. State electoral deadlocks over selection of federal senators were also rarer than the progressives claimed, and most state legislatures dealt with such disagreements while continuing to govern. The progressives dealt with this roadblock to their agenda by spreading fake news. Media mogul William Randolph Hearst and his yellow journalists spread the idea of widespread senatorial corruption using flamboyant headlines like the treason of the Senate. Over time, people began to believe the lie, and a grassroots rebellion, they elected state representatives who supported direct election of senators. When 31 states passed resolutions calling in for an amendment, Congress finally capitulated. Thus, out of manufactured hysteria over non-existent corruption, the 17th Amendment was born, robbing states of their most notable constitutional check on federal lawmaking in the name of democracy. Ever since, states have been reduced to hiring lobbyists to influence federal policy. In 2009, state and local governments spent more than $83.5 million on such efforts. So, essentially what this is saying is the very claim that was made that, having an amendment like the 17th would get the corruption out of the state governments who are just, trying to further their own agendas rather than the agenda of the people. It actually did the exact opposite of what they were claiming to be against. What a shock. And this is the danger of living in a society where majoritarianism, where populism becomes essentially the rule of the day, the rule of law. If you allow people to be fed lies and to, vote based purely on a democratic system, then it doesn't matter what the 49% say. As long as the 51% say we want this, then that's what you get. That's why the founders set up the Senate the way they did. They also wanted to have the state be involved with matters of the federal government. They didn't want it to just be, you have the federal government over here, then separately you have the state governments, and then the local governments beneath that. No, they wanted it to all coexist together. They wanted it all to serve, ultimately, the will of the people. They wanted them all to work together, again, with checks and balances. That's why that system was so important. But the progressives, on the other hand, wanted to deceive the people. Why? Because they wanted more power. Can you imagine, for an instant, the repeal of the 17th Amendment passing through Congress today? Can you see that happening? I certainly can't. Now, why would they have the House be elected directly by the people? Well, again, it goes back to checks and balances, but they also believe, like I said, in the people having their own say. So while bills originate in the House, they become verified through the Senate. So yeah, absolutely, get whatever bill you want to be originated and get it through the House. But the Senate, serving, at the pleasure of the state legislature, which ultimately would, trickle back to the relationship between the state senators and the state legislatures and the people, would keep the House in check and make sure that nothing they passed went beyond the Constitution. So really, it's a brilliant system. But now, we are operating less and less as a federalist society. Now, we're operating more and more as a post-constitutional republic. And that is the danger of where we are today. If we don't get back to those ideals, these problems won't go away. This is one of the big, I think, goals into helping turn this country around, is returning power back to the states and ultimately back to the people. Thank you so much for listening in to the Blake Johnson program. It's been an honor to be here today. I hope you've learned something. Hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week with more history, more studying, more research, and more talking about the things that are going on in this world. We'll get through it all together. So I do hope you enjoy a wonderful, wonderful week. Catch you back here Monday. Take care, and God bless.